Hey folks, so this is a video on personal boundaries. Personal boundaries are the cornerstone of any good relationship. If you're somebody that finds themselves dating crazy people or unreliable people, or continually finds themselves in just drama-ridden relationships, then the core issue there is going to be a boundary issue. So there's two types of boundary violations to think about, and this is really, really important. So I got a puppy. I'm always worried about him pooping everywhere. You want to see him? Boom. He's a puppy. What are you eating? Okay, that's okay. It's a puppy toy. So the first boundary violation is taking responsibility for other people's feelings and actions. So this is typically in psychology thought of as codependence. So that's the idea of like, an example might be, my girlfriend leaves for the weekend and I'm going to feel lonely. So maybe an example of codependence would be the girlfriend thinking, my boyfriend's going to feel so lonely when I leave. I should make sure that I call him all the time and I should worry about his well-being and stuff like that. Like, it sounds nice and it sounds helpful, but it's really not, because at the foundational value, or I guess you could say the foundational concern, is really one of selfishness. I'm assuming that I am the center of that person's reality, which is not a good idea. You don't want to date people or get involved in relationships with people where they expect you to be responsible in some way, shape, or form for their well-being. And the idea of codependence is I'm taking responsibility for feelings and actions that aren't my own. And then I'm behaving as if they are my own, which is not good. It's toxic, and it's ultimately self-centered. And we should really quick define what good boundaries are. The fundamental principle behind good boundaries is I take responsibility for my feelings and actions, and I expect you to take responsibility for your feelings and actions. And we relate based on our values together, and we relate with the idea that we aren't responsible to take care of each other. We can support each other, and we should support each other, but we are not responsible for the inner workings of each other's minds and the motivations behind each other's actions. So the first one is that codependence. It's taking responsibility for other people's feelings and actions. This is typically anxiously attached people too. You typically find people that are kind of like fixers, or people that are like very needy, or where they get most of their value from like what they can provide somebody else. This is codependence 101. So if you have like a mother that's like constantly trying to solve your problems or help you through things, but for some reason you feel suffocated, that might be there's a reason that you're feeling suffocated, and it's because there's a codependence to it. You can kind of tell that it's less about taking care of you and more about them feeling like they are important to you. So, and it is really doing it for themselves. So a lot of people fall into this. It's very common, but it's important to understand that. Now, codependence is one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum would be narcissism. And narcissism is the idea of, I expect you to take responsibility for my feelings and actions. So we'll go back to the girlfriend leaving example. Say your girlfriend leaves and you are incessantly texting her saying, like, what are you doing? I really miss you. Please take care of me, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of being needy or whatever. Your expectation is that your girlfriend should be somehow responsible for you feeling okay. When the truth of the matter is that you're responsible for your thoughts and actions. You're responsible for deciding how you perceive a situation, making things okay for you. And putting that responsibility on somebody else is not only unfair, but it's a boundary violation. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you see these two people constantly getting together. And by the way, the narcissistic one would be more closely associated with avoidant attachment if you're looking into attachment theory. So, but this is the trippy thing. You typically have codependent people and narcissistic people get together. And as I'm saying this, you might have some alarm bells going off in your head like, oh, fuck, I'm codependent. Like I for some reason, I kind of make it other people's problem when I'm not feeling okay. And the shitty thing about like having poor boundaries is you can't, when two people get together that have shitty boundaries together, you can't figure out where you begin and the other person ends, because you get so enmeshed together. You don't have a solidified identity. It becomes really enmeshed together. So it's like, or entangled is probably a better way of putting it. So it's hard to be a sovereign individual when you are in a boundaryless relationship. So returning back to the fundamental point, if you want to have good boundaries, or if you can think about in your own life situations where you're in relationships with people and it's a bit toxic because these boundaries aren't set, then your first step is going to be solidifying and identifying what your boundaries are. Making sure that if you are in relationships and they're causing you to either A, take responsibility for somebody's feelings and actions that aren't your responsibility, or B, that you're kind of subtly expecting people to do that for you, then you need to stop. That's the bottom line. Like, if you want to have healthy relationships, and if you want to be a quote-unquote mentally healthy adult and not act like an adolescent in relationships, this is what healthy adults do. They take responsibility for themselves, they take responsibility for their perceptions, and they treat others as if they have the capacity to do that for themselves as well. And an odd thing happens when you give people that space and that freedom, and when you set boundaries and say, hey, I'm not willing to take responsibility for that, but I'm willing to at least show you empathy. I understand that this is difficult, but blaming me for it is not the solution, and I refuse to take that blame. These are the things that ultimately create trust in relationships. You have to do these things and have these conversations. So I guess that's really the only thing I wanted to express is boundaries are extremely important. Typically, if you don't have good boundaries, you'll find other people that also don't have good boundaries, and it'll be complementary. So if yours are kind of codependent or anxious, then you'll probably find someone that is a bit narcissistic or avoidant. And the way to get out of it is to start to think about and solidify what your boundaries are. And then in the moments when you would typically want someone to soothe you, or want someone to, or want to take responsibility for somebody else's choices or feelings or actions, that you remember to go back to what you have control over and what is actually your responsibility, which is always going to be your feelings and actions. And that will create a nice, if you are able to get that down, that will create a separation between you and your partner where you guys both know where you live. And that's really, really good, because if you're an individual, and you maintain your sense of self, then you have that ability to actually care for another person. If you get all wrapped up in their stuff in some kind of toxic way, well, then you're playing the game of helping them, but it's really only serving to, kind of solidify whatever toxic underpinning was there keeping you guys together in the first place, to maintain the toxicness. So, and oftentimes that means setting boundaries with people you wouldn't want to set a boundary with, because it's really tough. It's tough to tell your mom, listen, Mom, I appreciate that you call me, but I'm an adult. I can take care of myself, and quite frankly, I don't need you to be involved in all aspects of my life anymore. That would feel difficult, but then it's your challenge to not take responsibility for your mom's feelings and actions there, or vice versa. So I'm rambling on. That's enough about that. But if you have any questions, or if you have any additional comments, please comment in the comment section. Again, this is all stuff that I'm just kind of learning in my own time and trying to inject into my own life, as I hopefully will have better and more healthy relationships. And of course, I don't get here by having perfectly awesome relationships. I get here because I've had a bunch of shitty relationships, or not even shitty, but a bunch of relationships that didn't quite meet what I needed. And I've realized that the common denominator was me, not the other people. So, yeah. All right. That's it.